So Manly P. Hall, I think, has one of the best grasps of Freemasonry and the symbols and the ideas behind it. What do you think Manly P. Hall's opinion of Freemasonry was, and why was he so adept at getting into the understanding of what Freemasonry was and just bringing it to life?
Well, that's a wonderful question. I'll start with the first part. If Manly P. Hall were living and were sitting with us at this table, I think he would probably agree with a lot of what's been said here. I've been very influenced by Manly P. Hall. Manly P. Hall was a Freemason himself. He became a Freemason in the 1950s. I believe he attained to the highest rank of Freemasonry, and he drew a lot of support from within Freemasonic lodges. In fact, you can go to very mainstream Freemasonic lodges today, and in their libraries you will find copies of Manly Hall's book, The Secret Teachings of All Ages. That was Manly Hall's magnum opus. So Manly Hall had very warm feelings towards Freemasonry, and I think that what we've been discussing probably reflects a lot of ideas that he would agree with. Hall's genius in being able to understand Masonry, his genius in being able to make sense of what sent other people into these flights of speculation and imagination, is that he would go back to source material. He was a real scholar. He would try to find people's diaries. He would try to find people's letters. He would read whatever he could get his hands on in terms of Freemasonic documents or literature. Much of it kept under lock and key and not easy to get one's hands on. And after you've become a Freemason, you're more or less sworn to secrecy, so you're not supposed to be airing the company secrets out in public. But Hall would do what no one else would think to do, which is he would just try to go and and retrace the footsteps of these organizations. He would take their way of thought seriously enough to sit down and actually read it, rather than just sit in his bedroom and stroke his chin and say, well, maybe this happened, And so Hall, I'll say another thing, Hall was also operating at a time, he was active in the 1920s, 1930s, 1940s. The material that we're talking about is much more accessible today. If I want to find a letter that George Washington wrote to a synagogue in Rhode Island, I can find that within 10 seconds on Google. It's no problem, although it's amazing how few people will actually make even that effort. But Manly Hall, he would travel to Washington, D.C., he would travel to people's homes, he would contact the ancestors of some of these people and ask if he could see their diaries and their letters. He was a real scholar. He thought with his head and he thought with his feet. He would go out there into the world and try to track things down. So part of his genius is his industriousness at a time when this material was rare, was very, very tough to get one's hands on, and he assembled a magnificent library of esoteric material at his organization in Los Angeles, the Philosophical Research Society. He combed the country and he combed the world for some of this material. So I guess Hall's genius was that he cared about esoteric and occult ideas, but his working habits were the working habits of a real back-to-basics scholar. And that's what I admire about him.
Let me ask you some very specific questions. Mm-hmm. Name some famous Freemasons from history.
Oh gosh, you can take your pick. I mean, honestly, they include Ronald Reagan, they include Harry Truman. In fact, they include Gerald Ford. They include Senator Jesse Helms, surprisingly enough. I'm naming mostly contemporary people, but I mean, if you could find presidents prior to the 1980s who weren't Freemasons, American presidents, you'd be finding the exceptions. Most of these people were Freemasons. Another figure was Joseph Smith, the prophet of Mormonism. Smith had a Freemasonic lodge when he brought his community to the town of Nauvoo, Illinois in the 1840s. Just any number of screen actors, presidents, politicians. I mean, truly, if you were to go through a list of American presidents, it would be a minority who weren't Freemasons. One of the earliest Freemasons that we know about in European history was a very important man whose name is not widely known. He was a British scholar and antiquarian named Elias Ashmole. His name is not known, but he was an important man because his diaries from the year 1646 are the very first and the earliest written references we have of Freemasonry. He in his diaries records being inducted into a Masonic lodge and attending lodge meetings. The reason why this is important, even though this man's name is not widely known, is that he was one of the co-founders of the British Royal Academy, which was one of the great organizations that sought to protect and promote modern methods in science, in medicine, in various wings of scholarship. The Royal Academy was one of the pillars of Enlightenment thought, and one of its key founders was a man who has provided us with one of the first written references to Freemasonry. So it gives you a sense of how important Freemasonry was in the development of modern Europe and the United States.
What are some common Freemason symbols?
Well, a very common Freemasonic symbol is a pentagram, the five-pointed star, which to many people looks sinister, but I think it's a very natural symbol. It's a very magnetic symbol. Some people think it represents man, the 5 points being the head and the limbs. The all-seeing eye is a very popular Masonic symbol. The all-seeing eye is an Egyptian hieroglyph that some people refer to as the Eye of Horus or the Eye of God. This idea that man does not exist in flesh alone, but there's something outside of us that's knowing, that's intelligent. The pyramid is a very popular symbol. Freemasonry to this day is secretive about its use of these symbols. And I'm not a Freemason, but I have spoken with Freemasons, and what they have disclosed to me is that these symbols are used in various ceremonies as badges and codes for ethical development. So if you were a Freemason and maybe you completed a certain period of ethical study using certain texts, you might have added to your apron or some piece of your Freemasonic regalia the all-seeing eye, for example, to connote knowledge. I don't think that Freemasonry today is the esoteric religious organization that it was, say, 200 years ago. But 200 years ago, Masons were drawing these symbols from ancient cultures and were doing so in a very, very purposeful way.
There's that famous illustration of George Washington wearing the Freemason apron.
He's wearing a Freemasonic apron, and on that Freemasonic apron is this all-seeing eye, this Egyptian hieroglyph, the same all-seeing eye basically that you find hovering above the pyramid on the back of our dollar bill. That's from the Great Seal of the United States. So Washington was not only familiar with these symbols, but they were his personal badges. So the fact that you find these spread around D.C., the town that bears his name, is not surprising. These symbols are a basic part of our history as Americans.